The movie begins with a haunting audio recording of a man speaking softly to his son, telling him that if he is now in the forest, it means they've already relocated to a remote farm, hoping it will be a safe place for their son, Solomon, to grow up and help the mother recover from her illness. However, there's a tinge of sadness in his voice as he admits that, instead of getting better, his wife's condition seems to be deteriorating and she is getting sicker. Soon after, we discover that Solomon is a blind boy, but his hearing ability is precise and peculiar. He sits quietly on the porch of their rustic farmhouse, occupying himself by collecting crickets in a small jar. His mother steps outside, her movements slow but deliberate. Before they head out, she gently helps Solomon into his coat. Solomon, though unable to see, instinctively reaches for the familiar rope that he ties securely around his waist. This rope is his lifeline, guiding him through the vast, unknown landscape. He also grabs hold of a long stick, which he uses to tap ahead and feel his way around in case of any traps in his path. As they walk, his mother offers him a bit of independence, allowing him to find the first trap on his own. But the vibe is very gloomy and the forest isn't welcoming. Solomon carefully feels for the warning bells they've set up to avoid danger, while using his stick to tap the ground, eventually leading him to the animal trap. The next morning, Solomon shares with his mother that the cricket he caught has stopped jumping and that he can't hear it. Concerned, she gently asks him how long it's been in the jar, but Solomon doesn't seem to know. With tenderness in her voice, she reminds him that all small creatures need fresh air, meat, and water to survive. She tries to turn the mood around by announcing that it's his father's birthday today, and as a special treat, they'll go fishing together. As they walk through the dense woods, the mother suddenly pauses, her ears attuned to something Solomon cannot hear. He also senses her unease and asks if something is wrong, but she brushes off his concerns with a calm tone, trying not to alarm him. Solomon, perceptive despite his blindness, asks about the animals they usually encounter, and his mother, impressed by his attentiveness, praises him for his observance. She suggests that perhaps the animals have wandered off to search for food, just as they are, or they may have gone to the lake to warn the fish before they are fished out of the water. Solomon smiles and they arrive shortly. The peaceful atmosphere is interrupted when Solomon suddenly asks his mother a difficult question about life. What happens when people die? His mother, caught off guard, hesitates for a moment. She carefully explains that death isn't the end of everything, but more like a transformation, a change in the way of life. Not wanting to dwell on such a heavy subject, she reassures Solomon that he doesn't need to worry about death for a very long time, especially since he's young, healthy, and has many years ahead of him. Solomon volunteers to look for real worms and walks a few steps away from his mother. While Solomon searches the ground for worms to use as bait, his mother hears rustling noises nearby. In the meantime, Solomon is holding a bunch of worms in his hands and stumbles upon a thick chain lying on the ground. He tugs at it curiously, but just then, the mother quickly finds him and gently scolds him for wandering too far away. His face brightens as he proudly shows her the worms he's found, and although she acknowledges that they're good for bait, she insists that they need to leave the area immediately and go home to cook the birthday cake. That evening, the mother bakes a small cake to celebrate what would have been her husband's birthday. She lights a single candle and begins singing "Happy Birthday," but Solomon interrupts her, asking if they really need to sing the song. Instead, she places the cake in front of him and suggests he make a wish before blowing out the candle. Solomon does so, but keeps his wish a secret, as tradition demands. As she tickles and cuddles her son playfully, her breath catches and a violent cough escapes her. It's clear her health is worsening, but she hides her struggle from Solomon, perhaps not wanting to burden him. At bedtime, a familiar sound fills the room, a tape recorder playing the voices of Solomon's parents. As they read him a bedtime story, the mother holds the book in her lap as they share the moment, with Solomon resting against her. The story is about a family of goats who stay safe and happy as long as they remain together. But when the baby goat strays from home, it encounters a terrifying monster and runs back to its parents, promising never to leave them again. There's something eerie about the tale, as if it holds a deeper meaning to the mother. When the story ends, Solomon expresses relief that the baby goat made it back home, and his mother agrees, sensing the underlying fear in his voice. As they sit in the quiet darkness, the mother brings up their earlier conversation about death. Solomon admits he still doesn't fully understand, and his mother, ever patient, tells him that's perfectly fine. She explains that no one truly understands death, which is why having faith in life is so important. When Solomon asks what faith means, she uses an example close to their hearts. She reminds him of the time their goat was very sick, and though it seemed like she wouldn't survive, Solomon had faith that she would indeed be okay. His mother beams with pride, telling him that he's a good boy before wishing him goodnight. Just before she leaves the room, Solomon calls out her name, telling her that he has faith in her too. Later that night, something strange happens. After leaving Solomon's room, the mother slips out of the house and heads into the woods. Yet she walks away, vanishing into the trees, as if she is following a mysterious call in the forest. Years pass and Solomon grows into a teenager, still blind. He listens to an old recording of his mother, her voice filled with warmth and love, but also precautions for his survival. In the recording, she explains that she had to leave him, but urges him to keep going and remember the 3 rules that will keep him safe at all times. The first rule is to always give back to the woods, as it provides him with everything he needs, and when he hunts or scavenges, he must do it for 2, one for himself and one for the forest. The second rule is to find comfort in singing their song whenever he feels like giving up on himself. The third and most important rule is to never let go of the rope that he has always had on his waist. The rope is his guide home, the land is his home, and holding on to the rope will ensure his safety and return. One day, Solomon checks all the traps around the farm, but is only able to catch one small fish. Frustrated by the meager results, he lies down in the middle of a grassy field, feeling defeated. He plucks the grass to let out his anger, but it only calms his nerves. His days have become repetitive, blending into one another, until one evening he hears something strange, a low growling sound and the clanking of chains being dragged along the ground, and though intrigued, Solomon decides not to investigate and returns home instead. That night, he hears the distressed bleating of the goat. Alarmed, he rushes out to check on it, but his heart sinks when he finds the goat's lifeless body covered in blood. Before he can comprehend what has happened, the goat's body is dragged away by an unseen force, leaving Solomon in shock. The next day, Solomon's frustration grows as the traps remain empty. He sits under a tree, feeling utterly defeated, when suddenly a loud gunshot echoes through the woods. He immediately runs toward the sound and stumbles upon a freshly killed deer. He bends down to see if the deer is still alive. As he inspects the animal, a man appears out of nowhere, claiming the deer as his own, saying he killed it from afar. Startled, Solomon pulls out a knife to defend himself, but the man quickly disarms him, knocking him out cold. Solomon awakens later to find the man tending to his injury. The man introduces himself as Hank and assures Solomon that he means no harm. Hank explains that he followed Solomon's rope to bring him home safely. Still cautious, Solomon grips his knife tightly, but Hank extends a hand of friendship, offering to clean his wound and give him some aspirin in exchange for a place to stay until morning. Solomon doesn't even know what aspirin is, but Hank promises he'll thank him for the relief it brings after taking it. Solomon, adamant about his independence, tells Hank he doesn't need any help for now. But Hank confesses that he actually needs Solomon's guidance, since without it, he'd be lost once nightfall comes, unable to navigate his way back in the dark. Hank also offers up the deer he just shot, suggesting they can share a meal if they return home together. Frustrated, Solomon walks off, but Hank just smiles and says he'll take that as a yes. Back at home, as night falls while Solomon is chopping wood, and the stew simmers on the stove, Hank starts exploring the house. He looks through Solomon's belongings and stumbles upon the baby goat bedtime storybook, the one that Solomon's mother used to read to him. For now, Hank takes it downstairs and places it somewhere on a shelf where Solomon can't touch it. While they sit in the house, Solomon listens to audio recordings of his mother while Hank finishes cooking the stew. At dinner, Solomon enjoys the stew Hank prepared. Hank casually asks if he can sleep by the fire that night, and Solomon agrees, letting him. Hank then brings up the idea of taking Solomon with him the next day, pointing out that Solomon's running low on supplies, and it might be safer for him to move elsewhere. Solomon immediately rejects the offer, saying he doesn't need any help. Hank shifts the conversation, mentioning that Solomon looks just like his parents, especially his mom in the family photo. Solomon, with deep emotion, firmly declares his love for her. Later that night, their peaceful sleep is shattered by a loud, eerie groan coming from the woods. Startled, Hank grabs his gun while Solomon nervously and silently descends the stairs. They step onto the porch, straining their ears but see nothing. Hank questions Solomon about the noise, but Solomon admits he has no idea what it was and insists he's never heard anything like it in all his time living there. Unconvinced, Hank goes inside to grab a flashlight, preparing to investigate. Solomon, anxious, pleads with him not to go, arguing that the noise has already stopped. He'll be back soon after discovering what it was. As Hank ventures into the woods, in the dense forest, Hank stumbles upon the corpse of a bear, savagely mauled and dismantled. He scans the area and spots a figure standing a few feet away. Panicking, Hank fires a shot, but the figure doesn't fall. Instead, it growls and charges at him at a fast pace. Hank manages to escape the woods, but the creature vanishes into the darkness without being discovered. Back at the house, Hank rushes to find Solomon, desperate for answers about what he just saw. But Solomon is curled up, rocking back and forth in his room, humming to comfort himself. It's clear he knows what Hank encountered, but he doesn't say it. Hank presses Solomon for answers, but the boy refuses to speak, pulling the blanket over his head. Hank finally relents, mentioning that whatever it was in the woods was powerful enough to kill a bear, and it wasn't friendly. Trying to soothe the frightened boy, Hank promises they're safe inside, but is now determined to take the boy out of this sinister forest. The next morning, Hank finds Solomon already up and working around the house. He tries to bring up the events of the previous night, but Solomon remains silent, not wanting to talk about it. Changing the subject, Hank offers to teach Solomon how to preserve the deer meat so he'll have enough food for the winter. As he sets up an old smoker, Hank asks Solomon if there's any chain they could use. Solomon remembers a chain he found years ago and tells Hank about it. Hank asks Solomon to lead him to the spot, and the two head there shortly. When they arrive, Hank praises Solomon for his bravery in setting all the traps. Solomon shows him where he once found the chain, and Hank comes across it. He grabs the chain and tries to pick it up, but notices it's long, with its other end deep within the forest. He offers to check it out, but Solomon refuses since his rope guide doesn't extend that far. Hank decides to follow the chain, telling Solomon to wait. As he ventures deeper, he discovers the chain's end is stuck deep in the ground and can't be pulled. Hank investigates briefly but doesn't go deeper, cutting the chain instead. When he returns to Solomon, he reassures him that they've got what they need and shouldn't worry about the rest. Later, as Hank sets up the smoker, Solomon asks if he can take a piece of the deer. Hank agrees, as they have plenty of meat, and Solomon takes the piece to the woods, offering it as a tribute. His mother's rule always echoed, one for the forest and one for yourself. Curious, Hank follows and asks what Solomon is doing. Solomon explains that he always hunts and gathers for two, himself and the woods. Hank jokes about whether this is witchcraft stuff, wondering if that's why strange animals are prowling around at night. He suggests they should figure out what's lurking in the woods before it becomes a bigger problem. Solomon hesitates, but eventually agrees to help set a trap for the creature he has always fed. Hank extends Solomon's rope guide so the boy can stay tethered while they explore deeper into the woods, mainly to set the trap for the creature. However, as they venture further, Solomon is suddenly yanked away by the rope, disappearing into the trees. Panicked, he screams for Hank, who chases after him, desperate to rescue him from whatever is dragging the rope. Back at the house, Hank tries to comfort the shaken Solomon, promising that whatever is out there won't be able to get inside. Then Hank asks Solomon if he's ever seen the journal his mother wrote. Surprised, Solomon says no, and asks what it contains. Hank hesitates at first, but then asks if Solomon would mind if he read some of it. The journal started when Solomon was just 4 and revealed a heartbreaking story. Solomon's mother, Nydia, had begun documenting their life at his father's suggestion, but the entries take a dark turn, detailing a growing rift between Solomon's parents. His father believed the isolation of the forest was doing more harm than good, while his mother insisted it was the right choice. It's implied that, in a fit of desperation, she either drove Solomon's father away or did something far worse to him. Hank, unsure of how to explain this, decides to leave out out the more troubling details and suggests they stop reading for the night. Solomon, though hesitant, agrees. However, while Solomon sleeps, Hank sets off into the woods again, carrying another large trap. Deep in the forest, he finds a clearing littered with animal bones, a haunting sight that makes him pause as the screen goes blank. The next morning, Solomon wakes up to find Hank missing around the house. He calls out to him, but to his dismay, Hank isn't available for a response. Worried, he ties on his rope guide and begins searching the farm and nearby woods. After hours of searching, where he finds another journal of Solomon's mother, this one filled with desperate scribbles addressed to Solomon, telling him she is so sorry. He is now feeling uneasy about what the mother could be apologizing for. It's getting dark and decides to return home after setting a bigger trap for the creature. However, before he does so, the scene shifts to Solomon. Just as Solomon listens to his mother's recording again, a gunshot echoes through the forest. Fear grips him and he heads toward the sound. At the edge of his rope, Solomon finds Hank's bag but no sign of the man. Desperate, he removes his rope guide and crawls forward, determined to find him and, if in trouble, rescue him. Eventually, Solomon stumbles upon Hank's lifeless body in the same clearing filled with animal bones. Overcome with grief, he screams out in agony, but before he can fully process what has happened to Hank, he hears the eerie clanking of chains nearby. To his shock, his mother appears, wild and disheveled, with chains wrapped around her body. She's the same creature Solomon has been feeding all along, the source of the terrifying noises that haunt the woods as well as the lake house. It becomes clear that Solomon's mother, feeling herself changed, had left him that night years ago to protect him, chaining herself in the woods to keep him safe from her creature-like self. Solomon's father had been right all along. As she strains to reach her son, Solomon starts humming their song, the song she taught him when he was a kid. To his surprise, his mother hums along with him, and in that moment, he realizes she's still there, buried beneath the monstrous exterior. The mother breaks free from her chains and embraces Solomon tightly, but he can't let go of his fear yet. With tears streaming down his face, Solomon stabs her repeatedly in the abdomen, ending her damnation to live in the woods. The movie comes to its close as Solomon collapses, violently coughing. He leans on a tree to catch his breath, but when he opens his eyes, we see that he now has fully functional eyeballs that can see his surroundings. The same illness that had transformed his mother has now passed on to him, and the film ends right there. And with that, the movie ends. We hope you enjoyed our recap. Like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing recaps. See you in the next one.